Anyway, any more questions?
What did you get for your birthday?
Very little. I had my 21st birthday. It was after the war, but things were very short. And I'm trying to. I had a little party, as I recall. I don't. Mostly books. I think I was an avid reader, so I got mostly books. But we didn't get expensive gifts. There wasn't anything in the shops really to buy. I think my mum bought me a little brooch. Yes, my mum bought me a little brooch, which was nice. Yeah.
How did you find the vacuum?
You got used to it. It wasn't very, it was very frugal, but it was fair. Everybody had a ration book. Now, I think the meat ration, I can't remember, I think it was about £6 a week, bearing in mind that salaries in those days weren't much higher than about £2 a week, if that. And things like sausages and corned beef were rationed, they weren't there every week, but when they were there, you had to take along your ration book and have it marked if you had anything that was not specifically rationed for every week. And things like fruit, you very seldom got any fruit, and if greengrocers had got bananas in and the word got around, there'd be a queue there in no time. And we were all encouraged to grow our own potatoes and vegetables and stuff like that because it just wasn't there. They couldn't afford to use too many ships to bring food in. They were busy doing other things, and they couldn't. And the ships were very good, the merchant navy, but so many of them got sunk because the Germans sent their submarines and sunk them. So they thought they'd starve us to death, but we did manage. Oh. Sweets were rationed. Terrible. Sweets were rationed. I can remember saving up mine so that I could buy a chocolate bar at the railway station. But no, but we managed. And we had a Minister of Food who worked out a sort of minimum diet that we could all exist on. And that's why I think my generation are living so long, because there wasn't any junk food to eat. Not that we got it even when food wasn't rationed, because we just couldn't afford it.
How we fed ourselves during the war, it was not easy. In fact, again, I was evacuated at the beginning of the war, during the very worst of the bombing of London, because I lived in London, and then I came back during the lull in the bombing, and I can remember my mother saying, "Maureen, Kennington's," there's like a meat bacon shop, I can't remember what you would call it nowadays. "Maureen, they've got sausages, they're going to have sausages tomorrow, so you've got to get up there and get in the queue." And so I just ran up, get in the queue with all the ladies with their shopping bags, and wait then for my mother to come and then take them. And so that was one thing I remember about rationing. And another thing I remember is my mother. My father was a policeman, so he was in a reserved occupation, so he didn't actually fight at the war, but he was very much involved in the war because the police saw everything. But my mother, initially, because my sister and I were evacuated, my mother was sent to work to Woolwich Arsenal, where they were making bombs and incendiaries or whatever it is they made. And unfortunately, she developed dermatitis because of the gunpowder, and so she wasn't able to carry on working. So they gave her an alternate. No, first of all, they evacuated the whole of Woolwich Arsenal up to Bolton in Lancashire because the arsenal was bombed, and she hated it. Imagine my poor dad back here in London being bombed and having to feed himself and one thing and another. She's up in Lancashire, we're down, my sister and I are evacuated. I mean, it was talk about split family, and she didn't like that at all. So they said, well, they only got two alternatives. You can either go in the land army or go on the buses. Well, my mother was a real townie, so the thought of going with all that mud and cows and what have you, so she said, well, I'll go on the buses. And so my mother became a clippy. And she was a clippy right the way through the war, and a long time after the war, even up till not long before we actually got married. And so that's the sort of thing that happened to families during the war. We were split
Shirley
up.
Was much too
everybody
young
just got on with it.
To be evacuated, weren't she?
But she was Well, I think you said
We were bombed out.
they were bombed out.
When I was 5 weeks old. It was in Cromwell Road. Where the martial arts centre is, in the houses in Stanford.
And that was most people killed in one incident.
That's where
I
they do.
think it was in the local.
Yeah, this is just.
Paper.
These are some of the houses further along the road which weren't damaged, but ours was obviously demolished. That was with the doodle bug.
So
That killed quite a few people. And
try to think of how it would affect you. You've got a small baby. Your house is bombed, completely
the husbands
destroyed.
were away in the war, so there's
And
women had a terrible time.
well, I think your parents moved in with their
Well, my
parents.
father was in India.
Beg your
My
pardon?
father was in India.
Oh, there you are. So,
The
Dad,
women were left with the children.
yes. This
Did
is
we mention to you about the plane crashing here? Or that's the thing about all the groups moving.
Yeah.
Isn't there a memorial in the garden up there?
Is there something in the garden itself? I know this plane, it was 2 days before war was declared, and there were a flight of 3 of them flying in the, shall we say, south end direction, and they touched wingtips, and this sergeant pilot, he brought it round in a shallow dive and missed the rooftops of the houses and crashed at the bottom of the garden between the school and the roughly out, will only be about, yes, only no, about 50 yards, isn't it? Yeah.
I think
and
in
of
the
course-
book we read about it, I think there were tennis courts there at the time.
We all the children, we climbed over the fence and dashed across the field to see it, but it was terrible really, because he just nearly made the field, which would have been, he'd have probably made a safe landing, but instead of which he was killed.
As my husband said, children had a different idea of the world. It was exciting. I mean, collecting scrap metal and things like that. And just to diverse a little bit, my father, as I say, kept rabbits to augment our meat ration. So my sister and I used to go out collecting rabbit food. Where did we collect it? From all the bombed out buildings, because that's where all the weeds and whatever grew. And we used to have, in fact, not so much.